Hello, everyone. 2 months ago, I ended my marriage after discovering my wife was cheating on me with none other than my own brother. For months before that, she announced she was pregnant, insisting the baby was mine. At first, I wanted to trust her, but my brother's frequent visits began to set off alarm bells. Something just didn't feel right. Eventually, I decided to check her phone, and that's when I uncovered enough to confront her. When faced with the evidence, she had no choice but to admit the affair had been happening for quite a while. This betrayal hit me especially hard because of my rocky history with my family. I've been estranged from them ever since I left home at 18. Growing up, I was always treated like an outsider, while my brother basked in the spotlight as the golden child. He could do no wrong, and I was made to feel like I didn't belong. It was painful enough to feel like a stranger within my own family, but I never imagined my brother would stoop this low, destroying what little trust remained. I'll never forget the day it all became too much. I walked into what was supposed to be a celebration for me, only to realize the party had started without me. To make matters worse, there was a cake, decorated with my brother's name, not mine. That was the final straw. I demanded an explanation from my parents, asking why they hadn't bothered to acknowledge my accomplishment. Their response floored me. They said they didn't want my brother to feel excluded after my acceptance letter, so they threw him a party instead. When I got upset, they accused me of being selfish, saying I should focus on supporting my brother instead of seeking attention for myself. That was the moment I decided I was done. I walked away from my family and never looked back. I worked hard to put myself through college, taking out loans and holding down a job to stay afloat. After graduating, I shared a tiny apartment with a friend and built my life from scratch. From the day I left for college, I cut all ties with my parents, and they never reached out to me either. Years passed, and life moved on. About a year ago, my brother contacted me online. He claimed he wanted to reconnect and mentioned that our parents missed me. By then, my life had changed a lot. I'd gotten married 2 years earlier and was living a stable, comfortable life. But I couldn't fully let go of the pain from the past, so I reluctantly agreed to meet with them. At first, it was tense and awkward, but they seemed to be making an effort to reconcile. I decided to give them a chance and even went so far as to invite them into my home to meet my wife and see the life I'd built. Looking back, introducing my brother to my wife was the worst mistake I could have made. They clicked instantly, too well, in fact. Before I knew it, they were sneaking around behind my back. Eventually, my wife told me she was pregnant. I was overjoyed, convinced the baby was mine. But as my brother started visiting more often, especially after the pregnancy announcement, things started to feel off. He would touch her belly and talk to it in a way that made me feel like an outsider in my own life. When I brought it up, my wife dismissed my concerns, insisting it was harmless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. About 6 months into the pregnancy, my suspicions boiled over. One night, while she was asleep, I checked her phone. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The messages between her and my brother made it clear. The baby was his. They had been seeing each other for a long time, and what's worse, they had no intention of coming clean. Their plan was to tell me after the baby was born, divorce me, and start a life together. They even planned to use child support for me to fund their new life. The next morning, I confronted her. At first, she tried to deny everything, but she eventually admitted the truth. That was the end of our 2-year marriage. Unsurprisingly, my parents took their side. All the talk about me and my brother being equally important turned out to be meaningless. When my ex and brother announced their engagement and my divorce on social media, my family's stance became crystal clear. They were fully behind them, completely ignoring the damage they'd done to me. For 6 months, my ex let me believe I was going to be a father, only for the truth to shatter me. I lost not just my wife, but also the child I thought was mine. The betrayal was unbearable. When I turned to my parents for support, they brushed me off, telling me I should be happy for my brother and ex, even encouraging me to celebrate with them. That was the final blow. I cut them all out of my life. The divorce was a nightmare. With my family backing her, my ex walked away with a huge settlement in my car. She and her lawyer painted me as controlling and toxic, claiming I forced her to quit her job, even though it was her decision. My family piled on, accusing me of having a bad attitude and making me the villain. It cost me dearly, but at least I got to keep the house. That felt like a hollow victory once everything was finalized. Determined to move forward, I buried myself in work. 2 weeks ago, my efforts paid off. I was promoted to a better position with a raise and a company car. Feeling genuinely happy for the first time in years, I decided to treat myself to dinner at my favorite restaurant. I made the mistake of posting about it online, and within days, my mother reached out, asking me to visit. Suspicious and confused, I ignored her messages, but soon she started calling non-stop. When I didn't reply to her messages, my mother decided to show up at my office. She wasn't taking no for an answer and caused a scene, even arguing with the receptionist when they tried to stop her. It was embarrassing, so I reluctantly promised to visit in a few days just to get her to leave. A couple of days later, I went to see them. My family had used the settlement money from my divorce to move into a bigger house to accommodate the baby who had been born about 3 weeks earlier. I suspected they were using the alimony to help cover the bills as well, but since the amount I was paying barely made a dent in my income, I didn't care much. When I arrived, my brother wasn't home, and my ex was asleep. It was just me and my parents. I skipped the small talk and waited for them to get to the point. After a few minutes of awkward silence, my father finally spoke up. He explained why they had called me over. My brother had been fired, and the settlement money, along with my alimony payments, wasn't enough to cover their expenses anymore. My retired parents were now struggling to make ends meet, especially with a newborn in the house. They had seen my social media post about my promotion and wanted me to pitch in financially. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd done to me, they had the nerve to ask for my help? For a moment, I just sat there in shock, processing the audacity of their request. Then, as the initial surprise faded, I realized I didn't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not money, nothing. Without a word, I got up and headed for the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to find my brother standing there. My parents were begging me to stay and hear them out, but my brother looked alarmed to see me. I ignored them all and kept walking. It was pouring rain, and my car was parked on their lawn a short distance away. By the time I reached it, I was soaked, and my frustration only grew. As I searched my pockets for my keys, my family followed me outside. My brother, who had always been smug and full of himself thanks to our parents' favoritism, suddenly looked desperate. He made one last attempt to plead for help, which was strange to see from someone who had always acted so superior. I could tell their situation was serious, but I'd had enough. I snapped, telling them to leave me alone and suggesting they try begging strangers on the street if they were so desperate. At least strangers might have more pity for them than I did. I climbed into my car and drove away, leaving them standing there in the rain. I won't lie. It felt good to finally stand up for myself after years of being mistreated. Now, it's been 2 days since that confrontation, and I've been second-guessing my decision. My mother hasn't stopped texting me, and I feel a twinge of guilt. I know I have the means to help them, and it wouldn't hurt me financially. But after everything they've put me through, I can't shake the feeling that helping them would only make me their doormat again. Eventually, I decided not to help, and while the guilt lingered, I reminded myself that they had abandoned me long before I ever walked away from them. During the divorce, they sided with my ex and left me to fend for myself. Why should I feel bad about doing the same to them? I told my mother to stop pestering me and warned her that if she didn't, I'd involve my lawyers. That finally seemed to get through to her, but it also upset them. A few days later, my brother showed up at my house. He started off by saying he felt bad about how I was treated as a kid, but quickly ruined it by adding that he couldn't help feeling superior to me, which is why he always got preferential treatment. He told me I needed to let go of my grudges and help our parents out since they were struggling. His patronizing tone was infuriating. I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous he sounded. I told him to focus on finding a job instead of wasting his time trying to guilt me into helping them. That hit a nerve. He snapped, accusing me of being jealous. Jealous that not only had our parents favored him, but even my ex-wife had chosen him over me. He said my refusal to help was just petty revenge. Instead of arguing, I simply agreed. I told him he was absolutely right. This was my way of getting back at them. and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. That set him off even more. He started yelling, threatening to force me to give them money and warning that I'd regret crossing him. I didn't back down. I leaned in close, looked him in the eye, and said, "If you want to try something stupid, go ahead. I'll be waiting. But you won't like how it ends." The anger and confusion on his face told me he knew I meant it. "Just remember," I added, "you brought this on yourself." With that, he left, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. After all these years, I finally stood my ground. If my brother thinks he can intimidate me, he's wasting his time. He can try all he wants, but I know he's incapable of actually doing anything. I'm not even remotely concerned. 3 days ago, he showed up again, trying to plead his case and convince me to help them, but just like before, it didn't work. My parents had already made their attempts, and those hadn't gone anywhere either. This time, my ex-wife decided to take her shot. I hesitated to answer her call, but I figured it was better to deal with her over the phone than risk another unwanted visit. When I answered, I was shocked by her audacity. She started off sounding polite, mentioning that her family was struggling financially. She acknowledged that I didn't owe them anything after what they'd done to me, but still urged me to be the bigger person. She tried to guilt-trip me, bringing up how my parents had supposedly sacrificed so much for me growing up and how she had been a good wife. A laughable claim considering she cheated on me with my own brother. I wasn't buying it. I reminded her that my parents had always favored my brother while treating me like an afterthought, and as for her, she destroyed our marriage by having an affair. Her attempts at manipulation fell flat. I told her I felt bad about their situation, but I was already paying alimony, a sum she didn't even deserve after what she'd done. I made it clear that I wasn't about to give them another cent. That's when she turned on the waterworks. She started sobbing, calling me selfish and heartless. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even after that performance, I stood my ground and refused to help. Then she resorted to threats, claiming she'd take me back to court, demand a higher alimony, and humiliate me all over again. Honestly, I'd love to see them try. The first time around, I was so emotionally drained and defeated that I didn't bother to fight. I let them paint me as toxic and controlling without contesting a thing, just to get the divorce over with. But things are different now. I'm stronger, and I'm not letting them walk all over me again. True to her word, my ex-wife filed for an increase in alimony. But this time, I was ready. I reached out to our mutual friends and explained the full story, including details they had never known about why our marriage ended. Most of them were shocked to hear the truth and offered to support me if it came to a court battle. I also contacted my lawyer and made it clear I wanted to terminate the alimony altogether. She didn't deserve a single dollar, and I was determined to prove it. Over the next few days, I gathered as much evidence as I could about how my family had treated me growing up and how they'd sided against me during the divorce. I even convinced some of my cousins, who had witnessed my parents' favoritism firsthand, to testify on my behalf. Despite not being particularly close, they were willing to step up and tell the truth. My lawyer was impressed with the case we built, saying we had a solid chance of winning. By the time we got to court, I had several video testimonials from friends and family members, all of which dismantled the lies my ex and my family had spread about me. It was clear they had expected me to roll over like before, but I wasn't that person anymore. I could see the surprise on their faces as my case unfolded. When the judge finally made their ruling, it was everything I'd hoped for. "Miss Brown," the judge said, addressing my ex, "after reviewing the case and considering the evidence, this court finds that since you have remarried, you are no longer eligible for alimony. Your ex-husband is no longer obligated to provide financial support. Alimony is meant to assist a spouse who cannot support themselves post-divorce, and that is no longer the case here. Therefore, your request for an increase in alimony is denied." The courtroom fell silent as the judge's words sank in. I watched as my ex's expression shifted from smug anticipation to stunned disbelief. The judge continued, "If you have further concerns, I suggest you consult with your attorney. But as it stands, this decision is final." It was official. I no longer had to pay alimony, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe again. My ex looked devastated, and the smugness my family had been carrying was wiped clean off their faces. As for me, I couldn't have cared less about how they felt. After all they'd put me through, I was just relieved it was over. Finally, I could move on with my life without them dragging me down. I had planned to celebrate with some takeout and a good movie, finally enjoying a moment of peace after everything I'd been through. But, as always, my family couldn't resist ruining it. When I arrived home, I noticed my brother's car parked outside, which immediately set me on edge. When I walked up to my front door, I found my family waiting for me, blocking the entrance. For a moment, I was stunned, unsure of what to say. But I quickly pulled myself together, took a deep breath, and decided not to let them see how much their presence annoyed me. "What do you want?" I asked calmly, my voice steady as I looked at them. My brother stepped forward, trying to mask the tension in his posture. "We need to talk," he said, his tone a mix of irritation and desperation. I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "I'm done with this. You don't get to dictate my life anymore." My mother's voice trembled as she chimed in, attempting to sound firm. "You can't just turn your back on us after everything we've been through as a family. We need your help. You owe us that much." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of her words. "Owe you? After all the betrayal, manipulation, and lies, you really think I owe you anything? You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences." My brother tried again, his voice softer but no less insistent. "You don't understand how hard things are for us right now. We're struggling, and you have the means to help. We're family." I shook my head, unmoved by their guilt-tripping. "Family? You had no problem throwing me under the bus when it suited you. Now it's my turn to live my life, free from your toxic nonsense. I'm not interested in your sob stories." As I turned to walk past them, my brother grabbed my arm and yanked me closer. His face was twisted with anger. "You think you can just ignore us and walk away? You're going to regret this." I met his gaze without flinching. "If you think intimidating me is going to change anything, you're dead wrong. I'm not afraid of you, and I won't be bullied." He let go of me, momentarily taken aback by my calm demeanor. My father, clearly trying to diffuse the tension, started to speak, but I cut him off. "You want respect? You need to earn it. This family has done nothing but belittle and manipulate me for years. Why should I give you anything now?" My mother's voice quivered as she pleaded, "We're family. Families are supposed to support each other, especially in tough times." I sighed and shook my head. Family doesn't betray each other. You all made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I've spent too long being the scapegoat, and I'm done playing that role. Frustrated, my brother snapped, "You're being selfish. You've changed since you got that promotion. You think you're better than us now?" I shrugged, smirking. "No, I've just realized I don't have to put up with your nonsense anymore. I worked hard for what I have, and I'm not letting you drag me down." I told them to leave my property, warning that if they didn't, I'd call the police. My father, growing more desperate, shouted, "You can't just kick us out like this. You should be ashamed of yourself." "Why should I be ashamed?" I shot back, my voice steady but firm. "I owe you nothing. You're the ones who betrayed me, not the other way around." After more shouting and arguments, my brother finally lost it. He grabbed my collar, his face red with anger. "You think you can just walk away from your family?" he growled. I stared him down, completely unfazed. "Let go of me, or I'll call the cops. You're trespassing." He held on for a moment, clearly trying to intimidate me, but I didn't budge. Finally, my father pulled him back just as he swung at me in a fit of rage. "You're just a jealous loser," my brother shouted, his voice shaking with frustration. "You'll never amount to anything." I laughed, the irony too much to ignore. "Coming from you? A guy who's unemployed, living with his parents, and begging for money? That's rich." "Enough!" my father yelled, trying to regain control of the situation. My patience was wearing thin, and I took a deep breath to steady myself. "Listen," I said, my tone cold and final. "You all need to leave. Now. If you don't, I'll call the cops. And given your financial situation, you might want to make a run for it before they get here." They exchanged glances, realizing I was serious. Reluctantly, they left, muttering angry comments as they went. 3 days later, I heard a loud, insistent knocking on my door. When I checked the peephole, I saw my brother standing there with my parents, angrier than ever. My heart raced, a mix of anxiety and determination surging through me. I grabbed my phone and called the police. "Yes, I'd like to report a potential threat," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My brother and parents are here, and I believe they might try to harm me." The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, though it would take a few minutes. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door, ready to face whatever was about to happen. "Well, look who finally decided to show his face," my brother sneered, stepping forward aggressively. "You think you can just call the cops and hide behind them? You're such a coward," my brother sneered as he stepped closer, his fists clenched. I stood firm, trying to maintain my composure. "Stay back. I don't want any trouble," I warned, my voice steady but laced with tension. He ignored me, his face twisted with rage. "You're not getting away with this. You're going to pay for everything." Before I could react, he lunged at me, wild desperation flashing in his eyes. Instinct took over as I sidestepped his swing, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Get away from me," I shouted, my voice echoing through the tense air. The faint sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, and I knew help was on the way. My brother stumbled but quickly regained his footing, his frustration evident as he glared at me. "You need to leave now, or you'll regret it," I warned again, hoping he'd back off. But his fury was beyond reason. Ignoring my words, he charged at me again, his fists raised. This time, I braced myself, prepared for the impact. "Stop right there," I yelled as he closed the gap between us, but he wasn't listening. Behind him, I could hear my parents yelling for him to calm down, their voices frantic. It was useless. He wasn't going to stop. When he swung again, I ducked, then countered with a sharp jab to his jaw. The impact reverberated through my hand, and for a moment, shock flickered across his face. He wiped his mouth, sneering. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted, though his anger betrayed him. I didn't respond, landing another punch to his ribs. He gasped for air, stumbling backward, his face contorted with pain. "Now you've really done it," he spat, his voice shaking with anger. "You think you can hit me and walk away? I'm going to make you regret this." His muscles tensed, and I knew he was gearing up for another attack. "Just back off, man. This isn't worth it," I said, my voice firm but pleading. But he was beyond reasoning. His eyes burned with rage as he charged again, completely ignoring the blaring sirens that signaled the police's arrival. As he lunged at me, fists swinging wildly, 2 officers burst onto the scene. "Step away from him," one of them commanded, inserting himself between us. But my brother wasn't done. Fueled by adrenaline and fury, he tried to push past the officer, his movements reckless. That's when AK-9 officer stepped forward, releasing his dog. In a blur, the trained dog lunged, clamping its jaws onto my brother's crotch with terrifying precision. "Ah!" my brother screamed, collapsing to the ground in agony. The dog held him there as the officers swiftly moved in to cuff him. "Do you want to press charges?" one officer asked, turning to me. I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos. "Your brother's in big trouble now," the officer said, shaking his head in disbelief as they secured my brother in the squad car. "Looks like we're looking at charges for assault and possibly attempted murder." My stomach turned at those words. Attempted murder? It dawned on me that my brother might try to twist the story to his advantage. The thought of him framing me sent a chill down my spine, but I shook it off. I knew the evidence would speak for itself. As the squad car pulled away, my parents rushed up to me, their faces a mix of fury and disbelief. "What have you done?" my father yelled, jabbing a finger in my direction as if this whole mess was my fault. I didn't stop to argue. "You should have thought about that before," I muttered, brushing past them without another glance. "You can't just ignore us," my mother cried, her voice filled with desperation. But I didn't turn back. I had finally taken a stand, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their chaos. As I walked away from them, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. The manipulations, the guilt tripping, the toxic cycles, they were behind me now, and I wasn't looking back. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.